Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. The highway was deserted, just like the surrounding desert. My rig's engine's steady hum and the faint glow of the dashboard lights were my sole companions. I was driving down I-40 with a shipment of steel toward Albuquerque soon after midnight. Even though I had been a long-haul truck driver for 22 years, nothing had prepared me for what I was going to experience that evening. I had always taken pleasure in my ability to drive through the night without stopping and push ahead fatigue, but something seemed different tonight. I turned off the radio in the hopes of finding some country music that would keep me awake, but all I got was silence as the miles passed by. The desert seemed to go on forever, a black emptiness on either side of the road. I hadn't seen a car or truck in hours, and I checked the time, which was 2:17 a.m. A heavy sense of dread hung in the air, pressing against me like the weight of the load I was carrying. At that moment, I noticed a dim glow on the horizon that resembled the flicker of neon lights at a truck stop in the distance. I read the Red Hollow truck stop story with relief. The building itself was not much better, with peeling paint and damaged lights that flickered as if they were on their own. And the rusted old sign as I pulled in the gas pumps seemed ancient, like you'd expect to find in a roadside museum. Last legs yet, I would benefit from a stretch and a cup of coffee. The air was unusually cold for the desert, and the wind howled softly as I parked the trailer and went outside. There was an eerie stillness to the place, as if it had been abandoned mid-shift, and as I walked in, the bell above the door chimed. The place was empty, not just of customers, but also of life. There was no cashier, no other truckers, no sounds of sizzling bacon from the kitchen, just the low hum of the refrigerator in the corner. The counter and knocked in the hopes of drawing attention, but there was nothing there. The only indication of life was a coffee pot that appeared to have been there 4 hours, with the black liquid inside having burned to a crisp. I felt a shiver run up my spine, knowing that something wasn't right, but I wasn't going anywhere without at least getting a cup of coffee. I grimaced at the bitter taste as I poured myself some, and then, as I was about to leave, I saw an odd payphone in the corner of the eye was walking toward it, half expecting the bell to stop before I arrived. But it didn't. I paused for a second, staring at the receiver before picking it up. It was a diner of the type that hadn't been in use for decades, and it was ringing. The sound reverberated through the deserted diner, sharp and shrill, and my heart was racing in my chest. Greetings. There was a little pause before a voice spoke in a low, raspy whisper that barely broke through the static. Don't leave me. I froze, tightened as the voice said the same thing again, but more urgently. Don't leave yet. I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding, and my instinct told me to run back to my truck and leave Red Hollow immediately. But something stopped me. It was the sense that I wasn't alone in the diner after all. I turned slowly, my eyes sweeping the dusty tables and empty booths, and then I noticed a figure standing in the doorway. It was hardly more than a shadow, its features hidden by the dim light, and my breath caught in my throat as the figure started to approach me gently. With my pulse pounding in my chest, I ran for the door. When I got to the handle, the door wouldn't move because it was locked from the outside. I screamed in panic and banged on the door, but nobody answered. There couldn't be another soul 4 miles. I turned around, expecting to see the figure approaching, but it had vanished, and the diner was just as quiet and empty as before. I tried to calm myself, telling myself that it was only my imagination, but I knew better than to think that something was wrong with this place. The cafe was plunged into darkness when the lights flickered and went out, leaving only the faint illumination of the gas pumps outside to create long shadows over the windows. I took out my phone, but there was no coverage, and I was stuck in a suffocating quiet. I could hear my own short, rapid breathing as I strained to detect any movement or footsteps, and suddenly I heard the sound of tires on gravel. I hurried to the window in the hopes of to see another truck pull in, but what I saw chilled my blood. My rig was moving slowly, as though someone was inside directing it out of the lot, but there was no one in the driver's seat. I staggered back from the window, my mind racing, thinking that this couldn't be real. I must be having hallucinations, but the sound of the engine's low growl and the crunch of gravel were unmistakable. And then, as abruptly as it began, the sound stopped, and my truck disappeared into the evening. Desperation took over, and I grabbed a chair and smashed it against the glass door when I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. The cold wind hit me like a slap in the face as I ran outside, my boots crunching on the gravel. But there was no truck, no lights, no sound, just the vast, empty desert in front of me. I'm not sure how long I stood there looking into the dark, attempting to figure out what had recently taken place. A state trooper pulled up in his cruiser, the first sign of life I'd seen all night, and I started walking 4 miles because there was nothing else to do. Hours seemed to pass, but it could have been minutes. He asked me what had happened, but I was unable to explain. Naturally, he didn't believe me when I told him that your truck had disappeared into thin air and that you were being pursued by shadows. They discovered my rig 2 days later, abandoned on a road more than 100 miles away, the engine still running, but no one could explain how it got there or why the cargo was undamaged. When we got back to Red Hollow, the truck stop was gone, not just closed, gone like it had never existed. There was no sign of the diner, the pumps, or the payphone, just an empty stretch of desert. Since then, I've been driving long distances, although I now steer clear of that section of the highway, since occasionally I hear I know what I saw, and I know that whatever haunts that place is still out there waiting for the next trucker who dares to stop. Truckers talk about Red Hollow and how they've seen it appear late at night and disappear by morning. Some claim it's a mirage, while others believe it's a mental trick caused by fatigue. For truckers, the highway might feel like a second home, but occasionally it reminds you that it has a darker side. Perhaps it's the immense emptiness of the highways at night, or perhaps it's the feeling of being completely alone. Although I had been driving long-haul routes for over 15 years, this was not the first time I had worked an overnight shift or heard of odd occurrences on the road. However, before that night on Highway 93, I never genuinely thought they were on a cool October night. I had just crossed into Nevada and was traveling south on the 93. The locals refer to it as the Highway to Hell, but that's not because of anything supernatural. It's a lonely stretch of road with only mountains and desert on either side. If something goes wrong, you're on your own, with no cell service, no gas stations 4 miles, just you and the darkness. The radio crackled as I drove from Idaho to Las Vegas with a load of electronics. The travel had gone smoothly so far, so I assumed I would arrive at my destination a little after midnight. Reached a dead zone, so I switched it off and relied on the constant hum of the engine to keep me company. At about 11:30, the road ahead of me was still as deserted as it had been 4 hours, with no headlights in my mirrors or taillights. It was just me and the open desert when I suddenly saw her standing on the side of the road, directly on the edge of my high beams. A woman in a white dress fluttered in the breeze, but she wasn't waving me down or moving at all. She had long dark hair that hung over her face, hiding her features, and her arms hung limply at her sides. There was something unnerving about how still she was. I slowed the rig down and squinted into the darkness as I passed her. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of the night, miles from anywhere? I continued to drive, but a shiver ran up my spine. Perhaps she had collapsed and needed assistance. I had heard of people who had been stranded here, and the idea of abandoning someone in the desert didn't sit well with me. After a few seconds, I looked at my rearview mirror to get one last glimpse of her, but she was gone. My foot eased off the gas as I looked behind me, scanning the stretch of road where she had been standing. There was no sign of her. No white figure, no car pulled over, just darkness. I turned on my high beams and checked my mirrors again, but there was no sign of her. I felt a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I thought about turning around, but something deep inside me, whether it was instinct or fear, told me to keep going. About 10 minutes later, I saw her again, this time standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching as the rig skidded to a stop, and my heart was pounding as I gripped the steering wheel. She was closer now, and I could see her more clearly. Her dress was dirty and torn at the bottom. She was staring straight at me, her hair covering most of her face, save for one eye that showed through the strands. My hands were shaking as I reached for the radio to call for help, but all I got was static. Then, as abruptly as she had appeared, she was gone, not as if she had turned and walked away, but just that she was no longer there. I hit the horn, a loud, angry blast that reverberated throughout the desert, but she didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there as if daring me to run her down. I sat there gripping the wheel, my heart racing so hard I had heard tales of ghosts, strange figures, and other unexplainable things from other truckers, but I had always dismissed them as a result of exhaustion or overactive imaginations. Now that I was genuinely afraid, I felt it in my ears for the first time in years. I pressed on, my eyes flickering constantly between the road and my mirrors, every shadow appearing to move, every gust of wind feeling like something was following me. The miles seemed to go on forever, but at last I noticed the lights of a rest stop up ahead. As I pulled into the lot and parked, I felt a wave of relief. A few other trucks were already there, and seeing them brought me some solace. With my legs still trembling, I got out of the taxi and went inside to have a coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I walked to the counter, and the elderly man behind it nodded at me as I placed my order. "Long night?" he inquired, observing me. With a hint of interest, the man's face remained the same, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes as he asked, "Have you heard anything strange on this stretch of highway?" His voice was low, and I felt a chill go through me. "Who is the woman in white?" "She's been haunting that stretch of 93 for decades. Some say she was killed in a wreck-out," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. He shrugged, saying that most people who see her just drive on and never look back, but some of them gave me a grim look, and his voice trailed off. "A few of them don't make it to their next stop." I didn't say anything else after that. I just took my coffee and went back to my truck for the remainder of the night. There are others who say that she's looking for someone, but no one really knows. That rest break was too shaky to resume driving. The woman in white didn't show up again, but I still think about her every time I'm given a route that leads me down Highway 93. She had stood there staring at me and vanished without a trace. The following morning, I drove the remaining distance to Vegas during the day. A knot tightens in my chest, and I hope she never stands there again. Some things on the road are inexplicable, and you're better off not attempting to explain them. Comprehend nothing compares to what happened in Black Canyon, a desolate stretch of road in the desert that cuts through Nevada like a scar. It was around midnight when I found myself heading down Highway 50, which is known as the loneliest road in America. For good reason, there is nothing there. I've been driving trucks for more than 20 years, and I've seen my share of strange things on the road. For a trucker like me, it's just another road, but for hundreds of miles, there are empty deserts, rocky cliffs, no towns, no gas stations, and no signs of life. However, that night the silence was different. It had a weight to it, as if someone was watching. An hour earlier, my radio had cut out, leaving only static in the cab, and my headlights barely penetrating the dense darkness. No one else was on the road, and there were no taillights or headlights behind me. Just me and my rig, and the endless highway vanished into the night. I had roughly 3 more hours until my next rest stop. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something outside, but all I saw was the empty road trailing behind me like a black ribbon. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I noticed that there was a figure standing in the middle of the road, dead center in my lane, with no headlights or car. I slammed on the brakes and screamed. I was already beginning to feel the weight of exhaustion pulling at me. My rig skittered to a stop just a few feet from him, and I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, staring at the figure that was illuminated by my headlights. He was tall, wearing jeans and an old, worn-out jacket, and his face was pale, almost grey. His eyes were wide open, but they seemed lifeless, as if he was looking at me, but not really seeing me. I said, "You need help, buddy," and rolled down my window, but he remained motionless, did not respond at all. Instead, he just stood there looking ahead uneasily. I took my flashlight from the seat beside me and got out of the truck. The desert air was much colder than it should have been for the season, and the only sound I heard was the low rumble of my engine. As I got closer to him, I repeated, "Hey, are you okay?" But got no response. When I shone my flashlight on his face, I saw something that chilled me to my core. His skin wasn't just pale. It appeared he moved, but not in a human manner. Rather, it was a jerky, unnatural movement, and his eyes were completely glazed over, as if he weren't actually there. His eyes were dry and cracked, as if they had been burning in the sun for days. My heart skipped a beat when he abruptly snapped his head in my direction and gestured slowly up the road into the darkness. Even though my instinct told me to get back in the truck and go, there was something almost mesmerizing about the way against my better judgment. He pointed, I took a step back and followed his eyes down the road when I noticed the lights. At first, they were just a faint glow on the horizon, but as they approached, I recognized that it was another truck. A large rig was speeding down the road, and I was relieved to see another driver at last. However, as the truck got closer, I realized something was wrong. The headlights were flickering as if they were going out, and the truck's paint was peeling and the metal was rusted as if it had been deserted for years. But it was speeding directly at me. I staggered back toward my rig, my pulse pounding, as the phantom truck approached, its engine roaring, but the cab was empty and the driver was gone. I stood frozen in shock as the truck blasted by me and vanished into the darkness. When I turned to face the guy in the road again, he had vanished. Without wasting any more time, I leapt back into my cab, slammed the door shut, and spun my tires as I drove away down the highway. I could not keep my hands on the wheel 4 miles because they were shaking so much. When I finally came to a small truck stop on the edge of the desert, I pulled in and parked, taking deep breaths to calm myself. I drove in silence, the eerie quiet pressing down on me, my eyes constantly flicking to the mirrors, half expecting to see the phantom truck or the strange man reappear. But the road remained empty. I stumbled inside, since the diner's lights were a pleasant sight. I sat down, still trembling, and ordered a coffee, because I was anxious for some coffee and the comfort of human interaction. The establishment was almost empty, with only a few elderly people seated at the counter and the waitress at the register. After pouring me a cup, the middle-aged waiter, who had weary eyes, inquired about my well-being. Yes, even if my voice sounded unconvincing, I continued, "You didn't take 50 through Black Canyon, did you?" She glanced at me, her brow furrowing, and I nodded. Looked at one of the elderly men behind the counter. "You're not the first driver to come through here talking about seeing things on that stretch of road," she remarked quietly, adding that there have been accounts of the location being cursed for years. It was a mining town out there decades ago, and when the mines dried up, the entire city went under. People claim the last bunch that lived there never left, and some of them still roam the streets. I chuckled, but the term sent a chill down my spine. The old man at the counter looked toward me, his eyes narrowing. Highway in search of assistance, I wanted to laugh it off and tell them it was just my sleepy mind playing tricks on me, but I knew deep down what I had seen, and no amount of reasoning could make it go away. I gazed at him, my coffee getting cold in my hands. I thanked the waitress, sipped my coffee, and went back to my truck, but the elderly man's comment stayed with me. As I got back in the cab, I silently vowed to stay away from that section of the highway going forward, because there are things there that defy explanation. I still drive long haul and have a lot of miles under my belt since that night, but occasionally, as I'm traveling through a desolate area of the desert, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the distance, a flicker of headlights, a figure standing just out of sight, and I can't help but wonder if Black Canyon is still out there waiting. Reason, logic, and the road have a way of reminding you that you're never really alone. You're never really alone. It's a lonely but predictable life, and I've spent more nights on the road than I'd like to admit. This is one of those stories that occasionally disturbs even the most seasoned truck driver. Trucking isn't glamorous. It involves long hours, lousy coffee, and miles of empty highways. I was transporting a consignment of canned goods from Chicago to Dallas, making good speed over a desolate section of Route 13, a highway I generally avoided. On a late October night, when the bitter wind stabbed through your jacket and the sky was only a blanket of black, I regret my choice for no specific reason other than the fact that it wasn't the fastest path, yet something pulled me there that evening. Perhaps it was instinct or a desire to escape traffic. The route passes through some of Missouri's most barren areas, with miles of fields, dense forests, and the occasional abandoned farmhouse. Cell phone service is unavailable for hours, and the towns you pass seem like holdovers from a bygone era. It was around midnight when I first noticed the fog rolling, and it was suddenly thick and strange. My headlights were barely cutting through the road in front of me, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I tried the radio, but all I could hear was static, and the CB wasn't much better. All I could hear were faint crackles and the occasional word that I couldn't understand. I turned it off and concentrated on the road ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, before the engine suddenly stuttered and the dashboard lights flickered, and the rig lurched ahead before leveling out. My heart was racing, but the engine stopped and I continued to drive, convincing myself that the fog was simply interfering with the electronics. 5 minutes later, I spotted something on the side of the road. At first, I assumed it was just another trucker, possibly having a breakdown, but as I approached, I saw it wasn't a car, but rather a man strolling down the highway with his head down, wearing an old leather jacket, without a flashlight or reflective vest. Fog. I reduced my speed and rolled down my window halfway, saying, "Hey, you need a ride?" He didn't answer, didn't even look up, and simply continued to walk. There was something unnerving about the way he moved. His legs moved robotically, his strides methodical and slow, that made me call out again. I might have simply drove past him, but something bothered me. This was no place to be stumbling around in the bitter cold. "Friend, you still need help." Contrary to my better judgment, I pulled the vehicle over a few feet ahead of him at this time of night, put on my safety gear, and got out. "Hey dude, do you need her?" As I got a good look at him, the words died in my throat. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the fog, and his clothes appeared to be worn out from being through hell and back. But what really stopped me was his face. His eyes were wide open and cloudy, as if he wasn't even seeing me, and his mouth was slightly open, allowing me to see the moisture from his breath in the chilly air. But without saying a word, he abruptly stopped, standing motionless 10 feet away from me, his head cocked slightly to one side, as if he was listening for something. My heartbeat quickened, and I automatically retreated toward my truck. "Are you okay?" I questioned, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. But there was no response, only the eerie sound of the wind and the distant rumble of my truck's engine. And then abruptly he turned and walked directly into the roadside woods, vanish into the mists. The fog grew thicker as I drove, making it feel like I was traveling through a tunnel with my headlights only illuminating a few feet in front of me. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see the man, but I was too stunned to move for a few seconds before I scurried back to the truck, slammed the door shut, locked it, and floored the gas, not caring about the speed limit anymore, standing behind me in the road. But nothing was there. After an hour or so, I eventually arrived at a rest stop, which was tiny, just a diner and a few gas pumps, but it felt like a lifeline. After pulling in, I turned off the engine and tried to relax for a minute. With trembling hands and icy perspiration on my back, I got out of the truck and entered the cafe, which was almost deserted save for a few other drivers and an elderly gentleman seated at the counter. As I sat down, the waitress, a weary-looking woman in her late 40s, nodded and asked, "Yeah, thanks," I muttered, still shaking, and she poured me coffee. I looked around the room and saw a faded map of the area on the wall. Route 13 cut through it like a scar, marking the towns along the way with tiny black dots. My eyes finally settled on an old town called Sable Grove, which is now close to where I'd seen the man. I took a sip of the coffee, then asked the waitress if she knew anything about Sable Grove. Her expression changed, and she glanced at the elderly man behind the counter before responding to my question about why I was hesitant. Then she quietly said, "You're not the first one to see him." They said that the man I had seen on the road was a trucker in the 1970s who crashed his rig out on Route 13 near Sable Grove, and that he was trapped in his cab for 3 days before they found him. By the time they found him, it was too late, and the room felt colder as she stared at her, my mind racing, and she shrugged, "Call it what you want, but I wouldn't take Route 13 again if I were you." The diner's dim lights cast long shadows, and people claimed that his spirit still walks the highway trying to flag down other truckers. But no one who stops ever hears him speak. He just walks away. I left the diner an hour later, feeling as though I had stepped out of another world. I couldn't get rid of the impression that the man was still out there, roving the highway in search of his next ride, even after I got back into my truck and turned on the motor. I've never traveled Route 13 since I've been operating trucks for nearly 30 years. I've seen every part of the nation, from the sweltering Arizona deserts to the snow-covered roads of Alaska. However, until the night I took it was a Thursday night, and I was enjoying my 4th cup of awful coffee at a dingy truck stop outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming, when dispatch called with a last-minute job. A load of steel needed to be transported from Denver to Salt Lake City via Devil's Pass. The weather was not looking good, and it was late, but the money was too good to refuse. If you're not from around here, you probably haven't heard of Devil's Pass, which is a dangerous stretch of highway that winds through the Rocky Mountains. Even in good weather, alleged that the number of fatalities it has caused over the years due to slippery roadways is the reason it gained its name. I wasn't one for ghost stories, and I wasn't going to let a little superstition stop me from finishing the job. So I loaded up, filled up, and headed out at around 10 p.m. with the goal of making it over the pass before the occasional trucker who never made it out on Rock Falls. The storm's worst, the first few hours were uneventful, with the highway stretching ahead of me and the radio humming with static. I passed tiny towns that flashed by at night. However, as I ascended deeper into the mountains, the snow began to fall more heavily. At first, it was just a light dusting, barely perceptible, but by the time I reached the base of Devil's Pass, it was coating the road in a layer of ice in thick, heavy sheets. I had not seen another car for more than an hour, and the sense of isolation was beginning to set in when I noticed the lights. At first, they were just a faint glow through the snow, but then I noticed a set of headlights slowly gaining on me from behind. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that perhaps another trucker could help us navigate this mess and keep each other safe. I slowed down, gripping the wheel tightly as I navigated the twists and turns of the mountain road. I looked in my mirrors to get a better look, but the snow made it impossible to see more than a few feet behind me. As the lights drew closer, though, something felt strange. The truck wasn't just catching up to me, it was speeding down the road at an unnatural rate and swerving across the icy pavement, as if the driver didn't care whether he stayed on the road or not. My instinct told me to accelerate in order to avoid the truck as much as possible, but the route was too hazardous. I kept my speed steady in the hopes that the other driver would pass me, but he didn't, and the truck pulled up directly behind me, its high beams blinding me through the mirrors. If I made one mistake, I would have ended up in a ditch or worse, over the side of the cliff. His front bumper almost kissed the rear of my trailer, and I could feel the vibrations. His engine's roar was so loud in the still night that I mumbled, my heart pounding, and I reached for the CB radio and flipped to the generic channel. I tried changing the channel again, but all I got was static. The snow swirled around me like a white veil, and the truck behind me showed no signs of slowing down. My knuckles were white on the wheel, and I began to consider whether I should just pull over and let him pass. However, before I could decide, the truck abruptly swerved into the other lane, briefly pulling up beside me through the deep snow. A glimpse of the rig showed that it was an old, rusted truck that had not been driven for decades. The paint was chipping and peeling, the metal was dented and corroded, and the windows gone. The windows were so covered in dirt that I couldn't see inside. I tried to find the driver, but no one was there, and the truck followed me, with its tires slipping dangerously on the snowy road and its engine howling louder than ever. My heart was racing. Chest and I was having trouble breathing as I looked back and saw that there was still no driver, and that the cab was heading down the mountain at breakneck speed. My voice was scarcely audible above the wind as I muttered, "Jesus Christ." My heart was pounding as panic struck, and I slammed on the gas in an attempt to outrun the ghost truck. But no matter how fast I drove, it stayed right next to me, its rusted frame trembling, and its headlights flickering as if they were going out. Then, just as fast as it had appeared, it veered off the road, and I slammed on the brakes, causing my truck to skid to a stop on the ice. My hands shaking, I sat there looking at the location where the other truck had disappeared. I thought I might see a twisted wreckage of metal at the bottom of the ravine, but for a few moments, all I could hear was the sound of the wind and the never-ending blanket of snow. I sat there trying to figure out what had happened. Was it the snow tricking my eyes? I thought I had seen everything, yet the tracks were still there, as distinct as day, swerving off the road and into the abyss. I tried to calm myself by taking a deep breath, but I had to keep moving because the storm was getting worse. I carefully put the truck back into gear and drove through the pass, navigating the winding road. By the time I got to the other side, the storm had passed and the sky had begun to clear. So I pulled into the closest truck stop, exhausted and shaken, my hands still shaking, and I parked the rig inside the small, dimly lit diner. I ordered a coffee, my mind still racing with what I heard to elderly truckers conversing at the counter as I was sipping my drink. One of them mentioned Devil's Pass, which is a crazy stretch of road, right? Another said, "You heard about that old rig that went off the side back in the 1980s. They say the driver lost control in a snowstorm and took a dive right over the cliff." I froze my coffee halfway to my lips, but I asked in a trembling voice, "What do you mean they never found the body?" The trucker turned to face me. Yes, it is the narrative of narrowing. Some people claim that the driver is still out there attempting to complete his final haul. Even since the truck was wrecked, I simply nodded, paid my money, and climbed back into my pickup to leave the diner without saying anything more. I was still out there attempting to complete his final load when the words replayed in my mind. I have not visited Devil's Pass since that evening, and I have no intention of doing so. Things that make even the most experienced drivers unable to explain after taking a life. Truck drivers reconsider the roads they travel, refuse to let go, and occasionally neither do the drivers.